BTB listeners, thank you so much for checking out today's episode. Listen, if this episode inspires you, do me a favor, take 5 seconds to shoot me a like and subscribe to the podcast. There are several more exciting guests that are in the pipeline, and I just can't thank you enough for your continued support, and let's keep paying the mission forward. In today's episode, I sit down with Colorado tennis legend Jeff Salzenstein. We discuss the legacy of his younger brother, Erik Salzenstein. Erik tragically lost his life to a drug overdose in 2023. It is a conversation that we both wanted to have, knowing that his brother's story needed to be told. US deaths due to fentanyl have nearly quadrupled in the last 5 years. But outside of Erik's addiction, the silver lining was what he learned throughout his journey, becoming a coach and a mentor himself, sharing the TED stage about his story going from prison to prosperity. Addiction is a very powerful problem that we see amongst many individuals and families. And Jeff and I wanted to show the importance of community and coming together to help one another no matter the circumstances. This is a powerful conversation, and I know it will impact you as a listener.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby.
Welcome to the BTB Project, designed to empower listeners to identify their why and to live their best lives no matter the circumstances. My name is Kollman Gearhart, a former athlete and motivational coach. I've had the opportunity to inspire thousands through my story and help accomplish what they are built to be. You'll be encouraged by each and every episode, and let's get into it.
Yeah, when I blow up, I'ma soar high like Peter Pan. In real life, be living out my dreams. If I'm waking up, it's in a foreign land.
Getting to do life with not only a good friend of mine, but someone that I've looked up to, someone that has done amazing things on the tennis court. But we promised ourselves after our first episode that we would come back and do a part two. Today, I'm not only ecstatic to have you back here in person, but to go into the depth of something that you and I can relate to, which is addiction. And I know that last year was a very tough year for you and your family, and it was always a tough time for me when I had my loss a little over 20 years ago. So with that said, I'd like to welcome back to the BTB Project, Jeff Salzenstein. Welcome, man.
Kollman, thanks for having me today. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation and connecting with you and sharing with those that are listening a powerful message that can hopefully help a lot of people.
You've been able to be part of a lot of powerful messages recently as you've honed in your craft, being able to impact businesses, being able to impact professionals. And I'd love to start out based off of this transition that you've made from being an elite athlete to a profound speaker, a business coach, someone that's helping a lot of people. I'd love for you to share how that has been since we had last spoke.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I turned 50 years old in October of 2023. And 50 years old, that's a number. We've lived some life here. And many people just get to 50 and they just keep doing what they've always done.
Yeah.
It's not how I operate. That's what you know about me, Kollman. There have always been transitions in my life. And when I went off to Stanford to play college tennis, I didn't know I was going to end up playing pro tennis. I thought I was going to get a real job. I transformed in college. I transformed my serve and my body and my skills. And I ended up playing pro tennis on and off for 11 years. I didn't know it would last 11 years, but injuries led me on a journey to study high performance. I didn't know 25 years ago when I was studying all things high performance, biomechanics, injury prevention, nutrition, sports psychology, spirituality. I didn't know then that 25 years later, I would be teaching these skills, these
Yeah.
fundamentals to CEOs, to executives, to entrepreneurs, to leadership teams. So it's so fascinating to now look back on my life and be able to put the puzzle pieces together and say, oh, I played pro tennis for 11 years so that I could be a coach. And then I became a coach on the tennis court. And I did that, as you know, you worked with me for a couple of years when I was cutting my teeth as a young tennis coach. And I got this crazy idea that I was going to build an online tennis instruction platform, starting with these videos from not even the phone, it was from the flip cam. So I studied entrepreneurship. Every season of my life has been about evolving, growing, doing the next thing, transitioning into entrepreneurship and the online platform into coaching leaders. And then now, a year and a half ago, I got this itch that I needed to share a message. And this was before my brother passed away, but I already was on the road to speaking, sharing performance principles, sharing principles that could help people cultivate extreme resilience, decrease their stress, optimize their performance, that there are tools and perspectives that people can use and they're struggling with right now if they're not using them. Obviously, my brother's story is super powerful. We're going to get into it today, but at 50 years old, I'm reinventing myself. There's a second curve of life ahead of me, and it's just getting started. I feel like I have a rebirth now because I've, in a way, shed my identity as the former tennis player slash coach. It will always be with me on the journey about tennis and professional tennis and the relationships that I've developed. But certainly I'm looking in the mirror in front of me going, wow, I'm going to be able to get on stages and share my stories from the past and share real-time tools and strategies that can make a difference in people's lives. Obviously, my brother's story really takes it to the next level because people can relate to that on many levels.
It's interesting that everything I've learned about you, both on the tennis court, but also what you've had to experience with helping your brother, the tragedy that you really faced with being able to be a helping hand for someone that was in no position or way to help themselves. And I can relate to that with what I had to experience with my mom and this path that we're on now where you've been able to resonate and identify to your brother's story. You helped him exponentially to be a speaker, to be a motivator. And I have taken this realm of following my mother's footsteps. She absolutely loves making people happy and being a servant heart. And she did that pretty darn well for a little over 30 years as a flight attendant for United Airlines. And a lot of the stuff when you're talking about reinventing, here I am doing a podcast and kind of having tennis be part of my life, but having this gift that I have of speaking and helping others and living on the legacy of what my mom asked me to do moments before her last breath, which was go help people. So as I say that, Jeff, and as we've covered where you're at now, how you've reinvented yourself, but also living on your brother's legacy. When I say Erik Salzenstein, what does that mean to you?
Well, it means a lot. I think in order to have the full context of the story around my brother and how connected we are,
Yeah.
not many people know this, but more people are going to know after they listen. And this might be TMI, but I was playing in the Kalamazoo Championship. It was second year 16s. And about 9 months later, after that tournament, Erik was born. And the joke was that my father and my stepmother took me to Kalamazoo, and he was conceived in the hotel at Kalamazoo.
I see.
To say that we are interconnected in some way, that my parents, my father and my stepmother, had their firstborn child later. They were older parents, 40 years old when they had Erik. I was the older child from a previous marriage. So when he was born, I was asked to be his godfather. And at 17 years old, my youngest brother, my half brother, was born. So I've always felt a bit of a duty or a responsibility to be there for him, especially knowing that my parents were older. So if something happened to them, that I would be in some way, shape, or form responsible. So even though I was traveling around the world playing pro tennis in my 20s, I went to Stanford and then playing pro tennis in my 20s. As he was growing up, I would go visit a couple times a year. I'd go to Orlando. I was training in Tampa. I would drive over to spend weekends. So I wasn't living in the home with him, but I was checking in and I was involved at a certain level. And I recently shared a story through an email to a list of subscribers. I remember my brother was an incredible basketball player as a youngster, 9, 10 years old. He was the point guard,
Nice.
dribbling through his legs. And when I was making my comeback after I had played Michael Chang at the US Open, I'd gotten to 140 in the world, and I had 2 surgeries before the age of 25. That's when I started, went to my first yoga class. I ate organic food. I started learning how to process pent-up emotions, becoming aware of my negative, stinky thinking and my self-sabotaging, limiting beliefs.
Right.
I went into all of that after all of these injuries. When I made my comeback at 26, I went to a tournament in Tallahassee, Florida. It was a challenger there. And I had to qualify. I was about 500 in the world. And I remember my brother coming up with my father to watch me in the qualifying rounds. And he's 9, 10 years old, and he's just dribbling that basketball through his leg. So when you ask that question, what does Erik Salzenstein mean to you? I remember him as a child having so much energy, just energy and charisma and spunk and a smile, and was really lit up a room when he walked in a room. And he commanded a room even at a young age. And I think part of it was his way of getting attention. Other people do it in other ways, but by him walking into the room and being the cool guy and being fun and being a great athlete and just having a great, bubbly, infectious personality, that's how I remember him as a youngster. And ironically, he was diagnosed with ADD at 9, 10 years old. The medication at the time before Adderall was Ritalin.
Yep.
He was prescribed Ritalin, and I, at 27, was already on this holistic health kick. So I went into research mode, and I found a doctor that would do mineral testing and find out where he was deficient. So there was that fork in the road. So do you go the more traditional route,
Right.
and you just go Ritalin and you put him in his seat in school and you just have this rambunctious, excitable 9-year-old, 10-year-old sitting in school and just being focused? Or do you work with a more holistic perspective? And the decision was made for him to start taking Ritalin. And I don't blame anyone for that, doctors or parents or anyone. It was just, that was the course of action that was taken. However, looking back on it, I think we could look at it and say a youngster taking a medication at that age could be changing his brain in some way,
Yep.
how it operates. And Erik and I used to have conversations about his sobriety or his recovery. And one of the things he would always tell me is he would say, Jeff, I don't even know what life is like without taking something. I don't know what life is like. So if you start on a medication at 10 years old, and this isn't for everyone, right? Some people can handle it, but some people are maybe predisposed to be more addicted to a substance. But if you're from 9 years old to 33, all you really know is taking something to soothe the pain, to feel different, to not want to be in your own body, to not want to be present. That's an impactful moment of a course where his brain might have changed and he might have actually had the belief that I only really can feel good when I'm taking something,
Yeah.
or I can only be focused when I'm taking something, or I can only be calm or peaceful. And yeah, Erik Salzenstein was full of life.
Yeah.
And now when I get on a stage and I bring him into the room, he's there. He's full of life and people feel it. They see the videos, they see the pictures. Like, he was a powerhouse and he was going to do big things in the world. And I still believe he's going to do big things in the world because I
Yeah.
have an opportunity to get on some big stages and help a lot of people. And it's really interesting to see how my work is coming through me. I can feel his presence in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, connection that you feel with your brother is identical to the connection that I have with my mother. And she just wasn't dealt the best deck of cards growing up. She came from a pretty severe bloodline of addiction. She took her first drink when she was 12 years old. Both her parents were drug and alcohol addicts, and her two sisters were both addicted to cocaine. She grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and it was a very white predominant family that she was in. And where this drinking started wasn't necessarily stemmed from the bloodline, but it was from how she was treated because they had a black caretaker that took care of their home, took care of the cooking and cleaning, and she absolutely fell in love with the caretaker, African American culture, and her parents looked down on that heavily. It turned into a situation where her mom and dad were emotionally and physically abusive to her, and that's what stemmed her into tipping into that bloodline of addiction. What was so fascinating, Jeff, is as you're sharing some of Eric's story, the nugget that you shared about the ADHD and the Ritalin and that being possibly a prerequisite to reconditioning the brain to be dependent on a substance. My mom was an addict, but she was a functional addict. As I shared, being a flight attendant back then, they weren't flight attendants, they were stewardess. Kind of on the tail end of your professional tennis career when you flew and got to be in that business class or first class, you dressed up and it was a treat to get on an airplane and to be served by these stewardess. And my mom really embraced that. And I got pictures of her sitting on Mr. T's lap. I got an awesome autograph from Jen Michael Gamble, and she had him on a flight when I was first getting into tennis. And really this infectious, spunky personality, despite being an alcoholic. There were so many people that fell in love with my mom's personality. The similarities that we have is we have people that we love that impacted the world, and they were doing it while still fighting their own demons. And I keep thinking to myself, what are we capable of as individuals or people that are listening to this podcast right now that might be either struggling with their own addictions or family that has addictions or friends that have addictions? But what are we capable of if we're able to truly hone in on some of the practices that you talked about with the holistic, the wellness piece? I'd love for you to tie together this moment of your brother obviously started going down a road of where you realize that there might be an issue here. And I noticed that with my mom when I took her to her first rehab. She told me when she went to that first rehab, Kollman, I don't know how to function without this substance. It's just an unbelievable feeling, Jeff, to know that I was right there with you. So maybe fast forward to that moment where, yes, he's trying to overcome some of this ADHD. He had this great crossover dribble in basketball, but when did you see that he might have a problem?
So when he was playing basketball, he was the starting point guard. And the way that he told me the story, if I remember it correctly, and ironically enough, I started learning a lot about his life when I went to go visit him in a maximum security prison in Tallahassee, Florida. So the ironies of some of these storylines were I go to that pro tournament that I ended up winning in Tallahassee, Florida, when he was bouncing the basketball around. And that was the beginning of my comeback at Florida State University. And then years later, I'm showing up at a maximum security prison outside of Tallahassee, Florida, where I won that tournament. And that would have been, 20 years later. He was 9 years old. 20 years later, I'm back in Tallahassee.
Wow.
At this maximum security prison. Ironically, both of my sisters both went to Florida State University. So Tallahassee, has always been an interesting place for me with this. But getting back to his teenage years, he was playing basketball and he was so good that he was playing up.
Yeah.
So he's playing with older people. And at some point, he wanted to be cool with the older people, older kids. And there might have been one or two of them that started smoking weed
Yep.
or were smoking weed. So for him to keep up with the Joneses and be cool, he probably started smoking weed. Also, at that time, he was really small and he didn't make a team or he got cut. And instead of maybe harnessing that like a Michael Jordan where he got cut from his high school team and the next year he comes back and he's better than ever, Erik made decisions to cope with the pain of getting cut. Also, he was always an entrepreneur by heart. He was the guy that was selling candy at school. He was selling cassette tapes. It was in his blood to be the man, to be the guy, to be cool. That just made it so that he graduated to drugs eventually, to where not only was he using them, but he started dealing them. Even in high school, he's finding ways to beat the system,
I see.
use and deal. For me, when did I know there was a problem? I wasn't living there, so I would get updates from my father around all of that, and certainly knew there was a problem when at 34 years old, I was burned out and stressed out from playing 11 years on the pro tour. I had broken the top 100 in the world about 4 years earlier, and I was struggling with injuries. I was lonely. I didn't want to get on planes anymore to play tournaments. And I went to go visit my father and my stepmother and my 3 siblings, Erik being one of them. And it was December 30th, 2007. I remember walking into his bedroom. He was a high school senior at the time.
Yeah.
Sprawled out on the floor, passed out, a white foamy substance coming out of his mouth. Erik was overtaken by a cocktail of drugs. And when I saw him lying on that bedroom floor, I realized I had to do something. And I'm an action guy.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone follows the Enneagram out there, but I'm an Enneagram 3, and apparently Enneagram 3s are the action takers. So it's in my DNA to take massive action in life. And I'm not one to just be frozen or be paralyzed. So when I saw him lying there, I picked him up by his shirt, put him in the car, got him to the hospital. They pumped his stomach. And that was scary. It was a really scary moment in my life. And I think the adrenaline kicks in. The years of playing tennis matches where you lose a point or you lose a match and you have to bounce back. You lose a point, you have 25 seconds. You lose a set, you got 90 seconds at the changeover to take a deep breath and say, what am I going to do here?
Right.
How do I turn this around? How do I get better? So many years of that. And then going into slumps where you're losing multiple matches in a row. How do you get yourself out of that slump? So I think tennis prepared me for a moment like that, a high stress moment where it was just kicked into gear that I had to do something. And within 6 days, I had borrowed $35,000 that I didn't have from friends and family. I found a rehab facility that was a 90-day program instead of a 30-day program. I felt like he needed more time.
Right.
We needed to buy more time to figure out what to do. He wasn't 18 at the time, so that was tricky because a lot of recovery centers only accept you when you're 18 or older. That was, the moment that my professional tennis career ended. It was the moment I realized that I was born to be a coach. A month later, I was coaching all these kids and I was like, whoa, I like this more than I like competing. And it was a moment that I started feeling this deeper sense of fulfillment by helping others. In this case, it was helping my brother in a moment of dire need. So that's when I moved back to Colorado, and we met shortly thereafter when I started coaching, and you came to my court to get a little advice of, what does this guy know from playing on the tour for 11 years?
Yep.
And I just started working. I started teaching tennis and helping kids and saving money so I could buy my first home and have Erik come live with me. So I'm 34 years old. He's 17. I had this grand plan that he was going to come live with me and we were going to grow up together. And that was the plan. And it worked for about 3 months. And then the recovery process and the slip ups, he started using drugs again. And it was just a trial by fire, learn on the go, how to try to handle this disease, this disorder, this demon that I didn't fully understand because I had lived that straight and narrow life of just following athletics. Well, I learned a lot through that, and I still bring it into my teaching and my coaching today around boundaries and around setting boundaries for yourself and getting coaching and doing your own work so that you can protect yourself from
Yeah.
that and hopefully still love your loved ones that are struggling with addiction, which we'll talk about, but also really protect yourself and your boundaries because it's what tears families apart.
And I noticed very quickly when I made that tough decision at 16 to tell my mom, either you're going to get in the car and go to rehab or I'm going to go. And at that point, my dad had already moved out, my brother had moved out, but I wanted to have a mom. I wanted to figure out a way to maintain a relationship. And it was just sad because I didn't have some of the adult years under my belt that you might have been able to have before extending the hand and olive branch that you did to your brother. So I had to grow up pretty quick when I was 16. And that moment that you talked about where, you find Erik on the floor, there had to have been
Hmm.
dozens and dozens of times that I would come home when I was living with my mom and food would be all over the floor, passed out. We had two little Yorkshire Terrier dogs, and the dogs would just be eating the food. And I remember on an almost every other night basis, I would take my two fingers and put it on my mom's neck just to see if she still had a pulse or if she was breathing. And I think it's really important to understand that when you're in the middle of these types of moments where you're trying to help somebody, you desperately want to understand why it's happening, but addiction is sometimes, if not 1,000% undefeated with never being a voice of reason because no one's going to understand the cognitive ramifications of someone wanting to have a substance control their body. And it just gets to this chaotic point, Jeff, where it's like, how bad can it get? But it also was a point of where I started to develop this resiliency and being able to understand how to read people. And it's fascinating because one of my great mentors, Ed Milet, his dad was an alcoholic and he's a tremendous motivational speaker and businessman and has an awesome podcast. He talks about how thankful he was for his dad's addiction because it allowed him to see people in so many different ways. Because he had to determine when his dad would come through the door whether or not his dad was drunk or sober. And there's so many kids that we've helped in tennis to where we have to figure out, are they coming to the court with a bad day? Or are they coming to the court with being on cloud nine or know that they, did their homework the day before and did their shadow swings and things like that. I think the stuff that we have experienced being part of addiction has allowed us to see people and help people in a different way. So with that said, when it came to that moment where you knew that brother's been to prison. You knew that he had a problem. You knew that you wanted to bring him to Colorado to try to help. I had many times in my life helping my mom through addiction where I wanted to give up on her on numerous occasions. But for some reason I didn't. Why didn't you ever give up on your brother?
Well, that's a loaded question because we could argue one side, you could argue that I did give up on him, but deep down, I didn't. And I'll explain. When he came to Colorado at 18 years old to finish high school and get his GED, we got him 2 jobs here in Denver. He actually was washing courts at Gates Tennis Center for a stretch.
Wow.
And he was working at Dick's Sporting Goods. And he was living in my house with me. And I was teaching tennis, and that was my first quote unquote job after playing pro tennis. And we were going to do this together. And then one of the big mistakes that was made at that time was the particular rehab facility that he went to. It was not 12-step, was not based on that. It was
Okay.
based on a different philosophy. And I remember the counselor, when he got out, telling me from this program, I was like, okay, what do I do when he gets out? And they basically were like, well, he's rehabilitated now, like he's good. And because they weren't aligned with AA or NA, there wasn't a transition period of what happens after. And of course, I was proactive and I found a mentor that worked with troubled teens in Colorado.
Okay.
His name is Aaron Huey, I believe. And we went to the hotel at Westminster, that high rise that you drive by,
Yeah.
the Westin, the
Right.
Westin.
The Weston, right.
So we met in the lobby there right when he got into town. Because again, I'm an action taker and I'm a big believer in coaching and I'm a big believer in programming. And I took him, and when the three of us met, and I was like, this guy's great. This guy could just take Erik under his wing. I don't want it to be me. I'm his brother. He's maybe not going to listen to me all the time. Let's get a mentor that. And I remember driving out of there that day with Erik, and he was just like, yeah, I don't need it. I don't need it.
Yep.
That was discouraging for me. There was no plan. I started noticing that he was staying up later. He'd come home. I could hear him rummaging around the house at like 2 a.m. And I remember we got in a big argument one night, and he was probably high that night. I'm not sure. But I put two and two together that he was using again. And I remember, and this is a point of talking today that I want to share with everybody, is that it's so important to get coaching, to get support. Like these families that don't get help, that try to navigate it on their own, and a father or a mother or a sibling, everyone's going to have a different opinion about how to handle the person that's struggling with addiction. And then the enabling and who's not, and who draws the tough love and who doesn't. I got coaching. And when he was using, I was told, listen, if he doesn't go back to rehab, which by the way, they were going to take him back again in Louisiana without charging him. I think it was just going to be room and board, not for the program. They would take him back. But of course he said, I'm not going back because that program doesn't work.
Right.
I told him, and I was coached on this. I said, okay, you have 6 days to find another place to live. Otherwise, I'll be putting your things on the front lawn. That's what they told me to do. And it was my way of setting a boundary. He ended up at 18 years old going back to Florida to live with my parents. And again, when I look at how all of it's unfolded, is that just not enough coaching and support for the whole family. I was getting coaching and support, but my stepmother and my father were not. My siblings, my young sisters were not. We weren't on the same page of how to handle this. And I would imagine many families are fractured and splintered and destroyed because there's always going to be a weak link. There's going to be a button to push to get what you want, to get money, to get whatever you need when you're an addict. I was always the bad guy. I was the one that put the boundaries down. I was the one that said, if you're using, I'm just not going to be involved in your life. But that created some challenges in my family around that. When he went back to Florida to live at home, eventually he started getting back into drugs and drug dealing. And that carried on for a few years before he was arrested on 2 felony counts. So the prison came after he left Denver. And what was interesting about that was he committed 2 felonies within a few months of each other for armed robbery that the detectives labeled as drug deals gone bad. And I remember Erik telling me the story in that Tallahassee prison when his eyes were clear and he was ready to transform. And he said, I was running through the ghetto of Orlando with helicopters flying over, chasing me, and dogs, those, whatever, the sniff dogs, chasing me through Orlando inner city ghetto. And I'm like, this is a kid from like the suburbs who played basketball. His mom's Catholic, his dad, my dad, he's a sports guy. Like, this isn't supposed to happen to my brother. And prison, he was supposed to get life in prison, but 2 weeks before his sentencing, the prosecuting attorney quit to get married. And a new attorney came in and knew the defense attorney, and they copped a plea for 4 years.
Wow.
So my brother always talks about how when he knew he was going to get sentenced, he prayed to God and he said, God, just give me the amount of time that I'm supposed to have to rehabilitate, to get this right. So he was given 4 years. So he goes to prison, and Erik told me that day when we were sitting across from each other near the end of his prison term, he said, Jeff, for the first half of it, I just mucked it up. I still was acting the exact same way in prison that I was outside of prison. I was still, dealing cigarettes and smoking and trying to beat the system and getting into fights. And it wasn't until he got into a gang-related fight where in prison, they test you.
Yeah.
They test your strength. If you can't back down from a fight, he fought a gang member and both of them were responsible. He was put in solitary confinement for 50 days. And I think that time, 50 days in solitary confinement, was a time for him to say, okay, this is not working.
Yeah.
Whatever I'm doing is not working. So he came out of that, and I remember him calling me from the prison house phone. He said, Jeff, this was interesting. Jeff, I really want to change, but I have no idea how to do it.
Yeah.
So there has to be this feeling from someone who's struggled for so long, like part of them really wants to change, but they don't know how to do it. They can't see the forest through the trees. We started doing weekly coaching calls, step by step. Okay, this is what you're going to do. I sent him the book, Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. I sent him the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And he started, what he told me was that, Jeff, I read Awaken the Giant Within, and now I had a blueprint. I had a map. I had a value system. I wasn't taught this by my parents or in school growing up. And a lot of kids that are raised a certain way, or they go to school, they maybe naturally develop their value system just by their environment. But for whatever reason, my brother got sidetracked. But now he had a blueprint, and he started to transform his body, mind, and soul in prison.
I think it was more or less not giving up on your brother.
Oh, yeah.
And that path that you just walked us through and what happened to him in prison and knowing that you were the bad guy, I felt like I was the bad guy too, Jeff, when I was trying to have those hard conversations, because one thing that I've seen with addiction is, as you've mentioned, they'll do whatever it takes to, protect their addiction. Man, I saw the belittling of my dad. I saw the belittling of my brother. I saw the belittling of me. And to sit there and take that, and then to get to a point like you did where you're like, listen, you were coached by someone to, hey, put their stuff on the lawn if he keeps doing this. And I was coached actually by a high school counselor that was helping me graduate high school because I wasn't very good in math and some other learning disabilities that I had, which could have been tied to my mom drinking when I was inside of her growing up, fetal alcohol syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to a point where I had a lot of hard conversations with my mom, but I think what is really powerful, Jeff, is those tough conversations you had with Erik. I didn't get a chance to get to know Erik very well, but I did watch his TED Talk. I did see some of the videos that he's had on YouTube. I do see someone that began to believe in themselves and see the value that they can bring because of some of the influence that you had, not just as an older brother, but as a coach, as a mentor. And I felt like I was coaching and mentoring my mother when those relapses happen, or your brother goes to prison, or my mom 4 rehabs. You have those tough love conversations, but when I say give up on somebody, you're not just going to let them continue to dwell down the path of destruction. You're going to have a hard conversation to where, hey, here's the ultimatum. Here's where we are. And that's really cool that you're able to have that with your brother.
So when he was living with me when he was 18, and I put 2 and 2 together that he was using. I haven't been around drugs in my life. I don't know how it all works, but I started figuring out that he was trying to take supplements to flush it out of his system. So he had a whole cocktail of vitamin B and all these different things.
Now, he was into fitness, right?
Correct.
So was he trying to use some of that passion to mask what he was doing?
Well, at that time, remember, he hadn't gone to prison yet, so he was still small and skinny.
I got it.
But he started telling me, oh, I'm going to go to the gym now these are the supplements I'm going to get. And then his behavior started changing. And then I remember I knew I could drug test him at any time, like randomly. And then I Googled and saw that all the supplements he had in the fridge were basically past like piss tests.
Wow.
So I put a piss test down on the table unannounced while he was watching TV one day, and he wouldn't look me in the eye. And I said, you can go ahead and take this test right now. And he says, I'm not taking it. And I said, okay, well then you can go back to rehab.
Yeah.
I'm not going because this place doesn't work. Okay. You have 6 days to find a place to live or you're out of here if you're not going to follow the program.
Wow.
So that was my tough love. That was how I was coached. It came from a place of love, but I also have enough self-love and boundaries for myself that I know I'm not helping him if I enable him. It's hard, but you have to know that boundary. So then he goes back to Florida and I'm basically not in touch with him for, I don't know, a couple years, 4 or 5 years. Like we barely talk. Why? Because he was using drugs and dealing drugs.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I don't have people in my life that use drugs and deal drugs, whether they're a brother or whether they're a friend or whether they're a stranger. Like it just, that's not my frequency. It's not my vibration. It's not who I hang out with. Now, I've since learned that I certainly could have reached out to him during those times and just sent him a text and said, I love you. I'm thinking about you. Johan Hari has a great TED talk that I wanted to comment on today about this idea that addiction, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And that we need to help people that are struggling with addiction. We need them to know that we're there for them.
Yep.
We need them to know that we will sit with them and listen to them and connect with them if they need that help. And that was something that I didn't offer to him during his struggles. It was almost like black and white. And that must have felt very off-putting for him, going, Jeff only loves me when I'm clean. He doesn't love me when I'm using. And I wish I had that knowledge now. Erik, I know you're using and I don't condone it, but if you're really struggling, you can call me and I'll come sit with you and we'll see if we can figure this out. But it's tricky, right? Because you don't want to be in that kind of push-pull,
Enabling, right? You don't
Correct.
want to enable.
But I think there's a way you can offer connection and love, a text, a short phone call, but it's hard because you have all this anger inside. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you destroying our family? Why are you doing this to yourself? I'm giving you the pathway to be successful and you're not doing it. So it's a complicated mix of emotions and thoughts that come into play. And when he went to prison, we weren't in touch, but guess what? When he wanted to change, who did he call? He called me because he knew. He was like, this guy's going to help me.
Yeah.
Like this guy's going to help me get out of this mess.
Yeah.
And then we started. And I remember when he got out of prison, he was in work release and he started crushing it right away. He was one of the top servers at Outback. Then he was one of the top servers in the country at Ocean Air.
Yeah.
And this guy could sell anything.
You're like top 3 in the nation of all
Of the Ocean Air.
I
Yeah, that's
saw
right.
that.
That's
Wow,
right.
man.
But I remember when he got out, he started drinking. He started drinking wine. He became a wine connoisseur. And that really upset me. I was like, man, everything you've been through, and you just spent 4 years in prison, and now you're drinking wine and you're convincing me that you can handle it. And again, when I think about that path for the next couple of years, I told him, I said, you could come back and live in Colorado, but there's not going to be any drinking. That was never going to happen for him. And so at the time I bought into his story that he could control it, that he could have a couple drinks and he was not like the others. And he just never fully bought into surrendering to the addiction, surrendering to the challenge and saying, I'm going to go all in. I'm going to surround myself in a sober community to get there. And that was him, again, probably not wanting to give in to that at that level. So he always was drinking coming out. And in hindsight, I helped him a lot during that phase. I got him into the rooms with the Craig Ballantynes and Todd Browns, all these top marketers. And he started learning the business of speaking and coaching, and he won the speaking contest that got his TEDx talk. All the while he was self-medicating in a way with alcohol. and, numbing. I mean, imagine whatever trauma or childhood adversity he experienced, whatever it was. I don't know what it was.
Yep.
I don't even know how severe it was. Gabor Mate talks about how it's not necessarily the event that happens to you, it's how you perceive the event on the inside.
Right.
So in my case, my parents were divorced when I was 4. It wasn't like they were fighting, they weren't screaming, but I probably picked up this energy as a 4-year-old that my dad left. He doesn't love me by that event. It's how I interpreted that event. So with my brother, I don't know what happened with him as a child to feel like he wasn't worthy and he wasn't loved. And that's usually what all of this stems from, is we use alcohol, we use drugs, we're addicted to work, we're addicted to porn, we're addicted to our cell phones because there's some feeling inside of us we don't want to feel. And there's some feeling of us not feeling worthy on the inside. So we go outside to feel better.
Yep.
And so drugs and alcohol are not the problem. It's the pain that we feel on the inside that we don't know how to work with. So you take my brother's situation, something with his childhood that made him feel not good enough. And then you take going to prison for 4 years, which is a traumatic situation. It's a very masculine dominant. You have to protect your turf. There's not a lot of emotions there. There's not a lot of touchy-feely, and it's hardcore. And so you get out into the real world, and now, okay, if I have a couple drinks every night, then I can soothe whatever pain that I'm feeling, that I'm not processing. And so I stayed with him during that time because I didn't know it was a problem. As soon as I found out that he started using hard drugs about 3 years after he got out of prison, when he was addicted to the hard stuff, that's when I had to just completely remove myself.
I see.
And I just wasn't involved. The last year before his passing, we were not in contact.
Okay.
So he would occasionally reach out to me. And that's the part of like never giving up on him. I would always tell him, and I would tell my family, he's one phone call away from just saying, I'm ready to go. And I'm there. I'm all in.
Yep.
That's all it took for me. So from that standpoint, I feel like, yes, I never gave up on him, because if he wanted to work the program, I was going to be his corner man.
So I
I was always going to be there. But if he was going to use, I drew a hard line that I will not have anything to do with that. And again, I think that's a healthy way for me, for my boundaries.
Sure.
And I think a lot of families struggle with this. And I think they can learn from, hey, if you are in a family that's struggling with addiction and there's a family member that's deep down addiction, I say you got to get coaching. You have to create boundaries. And you have to be doing your own personal work, and you have to be doing your work as a family. You got to be sitting around the table, be having a moderator or a mentor saying, this is the plan, follow it.
Right.
But what are the chances you're going to get a family to get everyone on the same page following the program? Everyone has their set of opinions. Yes, I never gave up on him in that I was always going to be there for him if he wanted to live a clean life. But as long as he was using, I really removed myself. And then again, that one regret is that I just didn't tell him enough that I loved him. I didn't tell him enough that if you need me to sit with you during a rough patch, I'll sit with you. I got an hour of time. I can sit with you. Whatever you need, man, I'll be connected to you, because I now understand that connection is the way we're going to solve addiction. We're in a world now where we're supposedly more connected with our cell phones than ever, but we're actually more disconnected. Anxiety, stress, addiction is on the rise because people are feeling lonely and people are feeling disconnected. So we need to focus as a society and as a family on healing our trauma. Gabor Mate talks about this, healing our childhood trauma. Everyone has to take responsibility for their own healing, healing as a family. And then we need to work on how we can connect on a deeper level with everybody in our lives, because when we feel connection, we're less inclined to use substances to feel better.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, Jeff, that you're saying connection, because here I have my mom's old AA book, and it's almost like the old high school yearbooks where everyone signs it. And these are all the people that my mom was going to battle with in her 4th rehab at Father Martin Ashley, which is actually a a celebrity rated rehab out in Baltimore, Maryland. Chris Farley passed away there. Matthew Perry had been there a few times. And that's what my mom thought it would take for her to overcome this dragon that she was facing. But the community that she put herself around, the support system that she had in the rehab was something that changed. Like you talked about seeing your brother in prison where his eyes weren't glazed over and you actually saw him for who he is. I got to see my mom for who she was in that moment, but it was because she replaced that addiction with coaching and mentorship, with putting a support system around her, and she was working the program. And I think you just said it really well, man, when it comes to how to not let the addict enable you to let them to not only continue to use, but to bring you down with them. The self-help, self-care, the alignment. There's no way that you can help anybody in your life without helping yourself first. And it's just powerful to me because as I look through some of these old signatures that she has and these messages, it makes me think, I work a lot with high school athletes and I'm trying to help connect with them still in sports and impact them and be a voice that allows them to know what their potential is. And I truly believe that impossible is nothing, that if you put your mind to something and if you put in the work, I'm really excited about those turnaround stories like you shared with Michael Jordan and finding ways to do incredible things. And that's what the BTB project has been built on. And stemming that from my mom's ability to find these connections, I saw the the platform, the blueprint to not have addiction be such an epidemic in this world. And I know you're going to tap into this with what eventually took your brother's life, but fentanyl overdose, alcohol, and we're talking about those are the two predominant addictions outside of what you're saying with phone addiction can happen, food addiction can happen. My kind of way to suppress some of the things I was feeling growing up was through eating a lot of food, getting up to 325 pounds in high school. That was my outlet. And the fact that you were able to find a way to maintain your alignment throughout your entire brother's journey and to support your family at the same time, to be that voice of reasoning is incredible. And I want to touch on one thing real quick with mentorship that I think is a very powerful perspective is sometimes when people are hurting, it's not about saying something to them. It's about being there with them, listening. Silence is one of the greatest support mechanisms that we don't tap into enough. And healing happens when you're quiet. And I noticed that with my mom coming out of her last rehab. She, at that point, was about to get fired from her job because her employer was tired of all the time that she was taking off, even though that she had this incredible tenure. But it got to a point where about 8 days before she passed away, my mom was sober. She came back from Baltimore. I just remember her skin and her smile and the way that she hugged me, and all of those moments of hurt and pain were outweighed by this, "Oh, this is my mom." Like, I finally got to have that connection with her, and it's when it comes to people that are hurting and trying to understand addiction and how to help others, the self-care, the alignment is huge for that individual, but it's also huge to just be there for that person, as you mentioned, say you love them, and then just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Because we can't fix people. As a coach, you as a coach, it's impossible to fix somebody. It's a two-way street. And I think it's really important for the listeners to understand that that's a really powerful perspective that we collectively have been able to uncover through seeing this addiction and facing adversity. But with that said, Jeff, I'd love for you to walk through the moments before
Mm.
your brother had passed, that moment where you got the phone call.
his business absolutely took off. In May of 2019, he came out to Denver. He was in a speaking contest run by Pete Vargas, Reach Live. Now Pete Vargas is doing a lot of work with Grant Cardone, 10X.
Yep.
So Pete is a friend of mine, and it's
I love
fun.
that. I get his emails because they're
Yeah.
doing a Great American Speaking
Right.
competition.
So that's basically
Love
what
it.
Erik won
Cool.
before it was called that.
Okay.
And so I've been on to this since 2016, 17. I have a tendency to find things somehow early on. I was drinking green drinks 25 years ago before they were cool. And so I found this speaking contest. I know Pete, he plays tennis. I've given him lessons before. And Erik got in this contest and we both entered the contest. Erik made the top 10. I did not. I always tell people Erik's a better speaker than I am. And he won this contest and I was standing right there filming it. And that was the moment we got his own TED Talk. Things started taking off. He got in the room with all these top marketers where he was almost like my apprentice, my secretary, personal assistant, if you will, in these rooms. And then he was learning how to build an online coaching business coaching. And I always wanted him to speak to youth, to share his story. But the rub there was that he was drinking. And he didn't feel like he could stand on a stage and talk about his transformation. And then people ask him, well, are you using drugs or are you drinking? And he wouldn't be able to say he was. And so the message was mixed there.
I got
So
it.
he got into business coaching and his business blew up and went from zero to, at one point he was making about $70,000 a month in the first 2 years of getting out of prison. And that's really fast to make that type of money. I always used to tell Erik, let's play the long game.
Yeah.
Let's play the long game. And I said, listen, Erik, I know all about the long game. I've been playing tennis since I was 4 years old. I know how to play the long game. I know how to wake up every day and we don't need these quick hits. We can just, but my brother, Erik, he liked the quick hits.
Yep.
So him going from 0 to 70 was big. And at that point, he always liked the nice cars. He always liked the nice clothes. He liked staying in the nice hotels. And that's a function, again, of trying to validate self-worth through external things.
Yep.
And I talk about that in my speech, whether it's money, power, control, the next business deal, or other worldly things. Our ego can get the best of us if we're not grounded and we're not following our soul's path. And so there was one moment in particular, he was with his girlfriend over in St. Petersburg, Florida, and they were staying at the Vinoy. It's a famous hotel. And he ran into his old drug dealers there.
Oh, wow.
And they exchanged phone numbers. And when he got back to Orlando, he texted the guy. And so I can only imagine that as he was ascending, his beliefs were probably, I can do this, which is what you saw in the speech. I can do this and be successful, meaning his business. But there was probably another voice in his head says, I'm still a piece of crap. I went to prison. I'm not good enough. So he probably had some cognitive dissonance. I can do it. I can't do it. Who am I to be a success story? I'm still this drug dealer, this drug addict. There's probably an element that wasn't cleared. And so he starts using drugs. These days in cocaine and weed, they're putting synthetic materials in drugs now, the fentanyl. And so my understanding is as soon as he started using some of these drugs, he was hooked deeply, like it gets into the brain.
Wow.
And he tried to stop a few times. He came to rehab in Colorado. He went to Inner Balance up in northern Colorado. And then he was in a sober living house in Denver for a couple of months. And at that point, he went for about 3 months. And then Erik and I had a falling out around after that recovery and just we weren't in touch for a year. And I would follow his stories on Instagram. So I would see what he was doing. And I could see sometimes when I didn't think he was sober on his videos, sometimes a lot of energy, whether it was the Adderall or the cocaine, or I don't know what it was, but yeah. So I would tell my ex-girlfriend, I would say, listen, at this rate, one of 3 things is going to happen. He's going to hurt somebody else. He's going to go back to prison, or he's going to die. So that's where it's going. I don't really see a scenario where he's going to wake up one day and live a life like Kollman or live a life like me. Like it just wasn't in a good place.
Yeah.
And in order for someone to just wake up one day and change, something bad has to usually happen. Like he went to prison for 4 years. He rehabilitated himself. Yeah, so I had that feeling things were not going well. He was in the hospital for a month with some kidney stuff. He had some episodes where he was almost like out of body type experience, psychotic type episodes. His brain wasn't working well. And then, yeah, shortly after January 2023, January 11th, I got the call from my stepmother. I remember I was in my ex-girlfriend's kitchen and I got the phone call, and she was hysterical on the other line.
Yeah.
And she said, he's not here anymore. And it was interesting because when I heard the news, my reaction was more of a numb reaction. There wasn't a lot of emotion behind it. And also I was like, okay, I'm like kicking into gear. Okay, I got to hold space for my stepmom, and I got to figure
Yeah.
out what's next. And it wasn't only, it was later that the emotion started pouring out. 2 weeks later, I read the eulogy at his memorial service. It was a beautiful service. We really celebrated his life. And then obviously with my speaking, I'm continuing to share his message. And now in my presentation slides, I actually have brought a video of him in to really motivate people. I'll give the Tony Robbins rah, rah. But, that moment that I heard that he died, I can't say that I was shocked when I heard the news.
Yeah.
Some people say, I was totally shocked and I didn't think this could ever happen. In a way, I had been preparing. I had been preparing for this, for that moment. I hate to say that I had that omen, but it was like, it didn't feel good to me the way it was headed. And, I've talked to my sister about it. God bless her. She's 24 years old. She's 26 years younger than I am. She lives here now in Denver, and our relationship is so strong. And one of the reasons she's here is because of Erik. And we go to church almost every Sunday. But we did a service, a 1-year anniversary kind of service together, a memorial. We sat on my floor, we lit candles, we listened to music, we read emails, we looked at his pictures, we watched videos.
Yeah.
And she kept saying, he's for sure looking down on us and tugging on little strings for us to go do what we're supposed to do. And I really believe that he suffered so much in this life. He suffered so much with the addiction since he was 10, 11, 12 years old. It was a painful road. That short stint of success was amazing, but it was a painful road for him. And I can't help but think that he's at peace.
Yep.
He's at peace. And now the people like myself and my sister and my family, we can carry on his legacy, and he can do it upstairs, just high-fiving us, smiling us, hugging us. And our family doesn't have to suffer.
Yeah.
Like we were really suffering. And I know my stepmother, God bless her, Seal has struggled. She lost her only blood son. Like I'm not her blood. She's my stepmom. Her chosen son is not here, and she's very attached. And obviously I can't imagine what it would be like to be a mother losing their son. But I do believe that he's in a better place truly, and that he is of more value and service because he doesn't have to suffer anymore. It just wasn't meant to be for him to be with us any longer.
Yeah. The anticipation, the not being surprised when it happened. Yeah. It's amazing how an overdose is what eventually took Erik's life. But the peace that you have felt from him, from that moment to where you're at today, the peace that your sisters felt knowing that he doesn't have to struggle with it anymore. I can certainly resonate with that. And what ended up taking my mom's life was not consuming again, is that she was so dependent on alcohol, Jeff, that when she went into that meeting to save her job, they ended up firing her at the meeting. This was over at the old Stapleton Airport United headquarters. And a counselor that my mom had been working with through this entire journey with love said, Peggy, listen, we support you. We want to help you, but you're no longer going to be able to be employed by United Airlines. And in that moment, she was so used to having a substance to suppress those types of chaos and hardships that she actually went into an alcoholic seizure, where her body did not know how to respond without the substance with the emotional chaos. And it ended up putting her into cardiac arrest. There were 2 pilots that were training in a simulator exercise about 15 steps away from the office that she was in. So they were able to perform CPR on her right away, and they got her over to CU Medical Center, and she was without a breath for about 47 minutes. And they just kept trying to do everything to get her heart to start again. And they were getting ready to pronouncing her gone, and she took a breath. At that point, I had no idea what was going on. I was supposed to actually have dinner with my mom that day. She didn't respond. I was trying to get in touch with her. My dad, my brother had no idea where she was. And I got a call. This is where her apartment was, and I was in her apartment. We got a call, and I usually let those calls go to voicemail because I hated picking up the phone at her apartment because I didn't know who was calling. As I
Mhm.
mentioned, she had those relationships far beyond just my dad, and it hurt me every time I picked up the phone and it was somebody that I didn't want to hear. So I let it go to voicemail, and I didn't know where she was. And I'm like, I'm just going to check this voicemail, see what's going on. And it was a nurse saying that they're looking for next of kin or kinship to Margaret S. Gearhart. And in that moment, I had no idea what next of kin even meant, but I called the number back. They said, your mom's in rough shape. You got to come down, call my dad and brother, go to the hospital. And there she was, man. She was clinically brain dead. And they had a cooling blanket on her, trying to run tests, trying to see what brain activity she had, if any. And a doctor came in about 12 hours after she was admitted and said to our family that she has a 1% chance of ever retaining any cognitive function, that she's a vegetable. I share all of that because I had to make a decision very similar to you, where your family around you is trying to handle this really tough situation with Erik, and my dad and my brother were trying to handle this tough situation with my mom. And my mom always told me, Jeff, that if she were to be in a position to where she had to be medically kept alive, that she just wanted to go. And I made the decision to pull the life support. And at that point, she was on a medical drip morphine for about 24 hours after that. And I got to spend one last time with my mom. Again, clinically brain dead, wasn't supposed to have any cognitive function. And I gave her a hug. I was affectionate with her. It was very hard for me to be affectionate with my mom because of the pain and hurt throughout my life. I just put my forehead on her forehead. I did a Bible verse. I prayed over her, and she opened her eyes and started crying. And she mumbled the words to me, "Go help people." And I remember having that moment, getting in my car, driving back up to Greeley. I was at UNC at the time, driving back to school, and my brother called me a couple hours later saying that my mom had departed to heaven, and departure time, which was very common in the airline business and all that fun stuff. But the irony in all of it is, how does someone that's clinically brain dead do something like that? And when it comes to where we're at today, and as we've walked through these collective difficult circumstances, sometimes difficult, sometimes heroic, sometimes motivational, inspirational, however you want to call it. When it comes to paying your brother's journey, your brother's message forward, and knowing that he changed a lot of people's lives, even though he was overcome by addiction. What is your mission moving forward on helping your brother's blueprint and his life, his legacy be remembered by people you come across?
Well, first off, Coleman, I want to just acknowledge what you shared today about your story. I know that when you asked me to do part two, there was going to be conversation from you about your story and then my story and how it's intertwined. And my heart goes out to you and to what you experienced in that season of your life. I know you're making comparisons to our stories, but to me, it's what you've done is remarkable and heroic as a son. Losing your mother this way, I can't imagine what that would feel like. So I'm really moved by your story and the intensity behind it. Somehow I feel like my story is just not even close, but it's all relative, right?
Right.
When my brother passed away, he had been kicked out of his mother's home because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. And he was staying with a friend and he was renting a room. And his roommate found him passed out on the floor with, I believe, a pipe next to him. It was cocaine and fentanyl was in his system. But he died in a little room with the door locked. They had to knock the door down. And he was alone in a room. And if we go back to the theme of addiction, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And he was alone. I think one of the things that I want people to think about is how they can learn to connect to themselves on a deeper level, how they can learn to love themselves and to practice a daily dose of worthiness. How you get there, everyone has a different way of getting there, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through religion, spirituality, waking up and getting more morning sunlight, taking cold showers, journaling. There's so many different pathways to connection, but really learning how to connect to yourself, really learning how to connect to your heart. And then when you don't even know how to do that, this idea of how do we as a collective continue to connect. So I turned 50 and I made a point coming out of a really tough breakup this past year and losing my brother as well. I decided I wanted to connect with men. And we got 20 people in a room for my birthday. And that was one of the highlights of my year and in my life. And it was because there were people around.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for us to focus on connection and belonging. A lot of people that struggle with addiction, they don't feel like they belong.
Right.
Our system is set up to shame people and to make people wrong for being addicts. And I've been guilty of that with my brother, of judging him and shaming him because he used drugs. And I just think that we need to change how we look at it, that we need to focus more on loving people and connecting with them when they're struggling rather than pushing them away. And again, that's a tricky, slippery slope. The final thing that I'll share around what I want people to remember, other than connection, is that I've taken many of my brother's lines from his TED Talk and from his speeches, and I've put it into my keynote. Some of the lines I use are his lines, his jokes. Again, a part of me, a part of him is inside of me when I get to use his words and share a powerful message. At the end of every social media video on Instagram, he would always say, "Let's grow together." Hashtag "Let's grow together." And so I think that builds on that idea of connection. It's like, how can we grow together? We had a talk a year and a half ago over pancakes. And I talked about my speaking career, and you decided to start a podcast that I imagine is going to lead to other things as well. And we, in a way, are growing together. We started with a conversation about what we were going to do next, and we've committed to that. And we're both on our growth journeys. And that's bringing you and I closer together on our paths because we're growing together. And so I think this idea of connecting and then let's grow together. Let's connect and let's grow together. And that was my brother's message.
I would like to tie that together to wrap up here, Jeff. Right over here on my mantle, I got a couple of postcards, and I find it ironic that you're talking about connection and you're talking about growing together, because I have a card from you that you wrote me thanking me for attending your 50th birthday party, where I got to connect with a lot of people that impacted your life. And it was just an incredible moment for me to even be a blip in that room. So thank you. Secondly, I have the last postcard that my mom wrote me from Father Martin Ashley, telling me how much she loves me, telling me how much she appreciated everything that I did for her. And I don't take it lightly, the various paths that we've taken in our lives, that we would come together and provide a message of hope, provide a message of encouragement, that no matter how dark it gets, no matter how difficult it gets in your life, that through community and through growing together, that we can become the best version of ourselves and we can help a whole lot of people. Addiction is a part of our lives, but it's not the end of our life. And there's a lot of lives that will be impacted by your movement, the lessons learned from taking care of your brother, taking care of your family. And I just am super excited for you, Jeff, of what's ahead, and that together we can continue to show that impossible is nothing, man. So being my first second guest back on the BTB project, I cannot thank you enough for joining me and sharing the story of Erik Salzenstein.
You're welcome. Thank you. I loved being here today.
Awesome, man. Thanks. What a remarkable journey we were just able to hear from Jeff talking about his younger brother, Erik, and the parallels that Jeff and I have drawn through our lives of addiction between what I experienced with my mom and what he experienced with his brother. At the end of the day, the most important person that we can help is ourselves. And Jeff sharing his brother's journey and how he's paying Erik's message forward, impacting lives as a coach, a mentor, helping businesses, helping professionals. And that, to me, is what legacy is all about. Listen, if Erik Salzenstein's story impacted you, do me a favor, like and subscribe to the BTB Project. Better yet, send this message to a family member, friend, or colleague and tell them why the episode impacted you. At the end of the day, we have the opportunity to grow together. Just like Erik said, I'm proud of each and every one of you. And until next time, take care.
You're told I'll be your heart, temptation.